Good afternoon, everybody. This is your host, Stella Adams, welcoming you to the second episode of Doing Justice Brings Joy. I want to apologize up front. I've got chipmunk cheeks, swollen face, and so I didn't want to expose you to that. I didn't want to expose me to that. So I've got this mask on today. I hope you'll indulge me. We're going to have a great show. I have a special guest appearing with me today, and we're going to be talking about secondary trauma and 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 what trauma informed self care looks like. This is and I'm going to start by just updating you on some news. Um, First of all, hot off the presses, um, President-elect Trump has been sentenced um, in his 34 felony counts, and the sentence was unconditional dismissal. He is a convicted felon, but he's not serving any he's not going to have to pay a fine. He doesn't have to report to probation. He doesn't have to do anything. He's just a convict, and that's all that is happening to him. When we think about our justice involved brothers and sisters, that's not a luxury that they have from the system. So the other thing that is going on right now, this is the fourth day in a row of fires out of control in Los Angeles and Los Angeles County. And over 180,000 people have been evacuated from their homes. Millionaires are staying at the Beverly Hills hotel at $1,000 a night. So many people have been displaced and structures have been damaged. How are people going to make it? I've invited Angela McGyver to join me today to talk about how those of us who are going to experience secondary trauma, what we need to do. Those of us who the first responders, the firemen, the policemen, the EMT, the social workers who are responsible for finding housing for these 180,000 people, the folks that work with the disabled, the folks that work to ensure that they are safe, all those folks that are volunteering, and all those folks that are witnessing this trauma. We're going to talk about that today. It's so much going on in the world. We also have to remember not allow what's happening in Los Angeles keep us from remembering what's going on right here in North Carolina with our victims of in the West from Helene. And we're talking about folks' experience. We're right in the middle of a winter weather crisis here in North Carolina. All the winter warnings are out. But how, for those 126,000 families that lost their homes in the mountains, what is their experience like right now? I've heard tales of children being separated from their parents by social services. There's a lot going on, and this is where the secondary trauma comes in that we are going to be exploring today. I'm looking to see if Angela is still in the ready room, if she can join us, and if yeah. Hi, Angela.
Hello, Miss Stella. Thank you so much, and congratulations on your podcast.
Thank you. So, Angela is the CEO of the Fair Housing Rights Center in southeastern Pennsylvania. She's also a long-term partner in crime with me. We have fought many battles together against predatory lenders, against uh, I've been in Pennsylvania so many times. We fought so much. We've gone before city council together. We've gone and worked with local pastors about building their communities. She is a street warrior queen, okay? And I'm going to be bringing you each week warriors that I know that are doing the work and moving us forward as we battle through this upcoming year. But Angela has also developed something really special that has grown out of her understanding of what we go through as practitioners, that what we go through when we're fighting for people, fighting against discrimination, fighting against these systems that are traumatizing our people, and how how we have to exist in helping people when we are also experiencing danger. And she has developed a program, and she calls this Imagine Being Well Consulting. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how she came to this vision, and also to kind of share with us what, so that we can even understand that as we're watching this on TV, we're experiencing trauma vicariously, and then how do we take care of ourselves? So, Angela, let's talk.
Thank you so much, Stella, for teeing up this conversation and for scheduling time to talk about why we must center ourselves sometimes in these conversations. And you asked, like, where did all this come from? Well, the origin began during the pandemic. There was an opportunity for me to take advantage of trauma-informed training. And I started and I couldn't stop. I ended up going from the beginning all the way through the end of this training opportunity here in Pennsylvania so that I could understand how trauma was affecting so many people, including me. And one of the gifts of it is that it gave me an entire vocabulary as well as what we call a neurosequential. And that comes from Dr. Bruce Perry, who wrote the book, The Boy Who Was Raised by a Dog. And he also authored a book with Oprah Winfrey about our traumatic experiences. But I needed to know, because I'm built that way. I want to know, what the heck is it? How does it work? And what can we do about it? And I want to say this much about it. Anybody who works in human services is at risk for exposure to secondary trauma.
So, one of the things we do on my podcast is we break things down. We don't dumb it down, but we break things down. So, when we talk about humans, people in the human services field, who are we talking about?
Folks who have contact with the public, whose job it is to serve the public in any capacity. So that's your street worker, the person who's picking up your garbage. Thank goodness for that, because they help to maintain not only beauty, but cleanliness and safety in our communities. It's your firefighter, it's your police officer, it's your social worker, your housing counselor, your fair housing advocate, your doctor, your nurse, your teacher, the people who work in the criminal justice system. We're all under this blanket of human service employee.
Well, that's pretty much all of us.
Yeah, I mean, most people in the private sector wouldn't consider themselves human service, but those of us that do nonprofit, public sector work, bureaucratic work, we're all in human services. It's really broad. And again, because we put our emotions and our heart into our work, and we are there with people through some of the most difficult times. Yeah, it's fun to get through the joyous times. And I love the name of your podcast. But when we're working with human beings, that means we're exposed to the full range of what it means to be a human, full range of emotions, full range of psychological experiences. And one of them is trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I'm going to go into the weeds of it, but I'll just say in an overarching way, trauma is something that's overwhelming,
Mm-hmm.
something that overrides the normal experience. Sometimes it feels inescapable. Sometimes it almost feels near death. Now, it doesn't have to be near death, and it certainly won't be described as near death for all people. So it's a individualized experience. What might traumatize me may not traumatize someone else.
Right.
So we have to leave space for people to, say that it or I was traumatized by an experience. And when it occurs, it can stay with us because it occurs in the body. It's not just what we witness visually, but it can lodge itself inside of our bodies. And there's a civil rights icon who, to my knowledge, is still alive, and you may know her, Mama Ruby Sales.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that I've seen her interview and ask people the question, baby, tell me where it hurts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that question is pertinent because she understands that when trauma impacts us and we don't move it out of our bodies, when we don't work our way through it, it's in the body and it can show up in the form of pain. It can manifest into disease, ailments. But for me, my throat, my stomach, my shoulders, I know when I'm being, exactly, I know when I'm being impacted because I feel pain.
Thank you. Again, right now, here in North Carolina, we have 120,000 families in the western part of the state who recently went through the trauma of losing everything as a result of Hurricane Helene. We also have, though, about 700 families in the east who have been through the same loss through hurricanes Matthew and Florence that have been in this trauma for a decade or more. Mm-hmm. And now these 700 families are being told there's no money left to take care of you while they're watching millions of dollars being spent, rightfully so, on these Western families. But what it taught me how it impacted me as a human services person is that these families have been in this state of trauma for a decade.
Yes.
It's very likely, that that's going to be the same experience in the long run for the families in the mountains. Because what happens is once the next big disaster comes, all the sunshine is gone from your disaster. There's nobody watching. They're moved on, right? The news media has moved on to California, to Los Angeles, and the fires. And so there's an immediacy, but then there's also this long-term care. Those of us who are left behind to care for the broken families, to make sure that these 700 families finally, after a decade, get what they're due, and to prevent the same level of trauma from impacting the families in the West, from impacting the families out in California. It's a lot of stress.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And when I listen to you, first of all, I can't help it. I have always been someone much like you and the other human service workers. We do this work because we care. We're people who care, and we need people who care, because what I'm hearing is the possibility of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mm.
Yes, people who will be exposed on a long-term basis to a stressor, and if they're not getting adequate services, physical, financial, and psychological support, that means every time it rains, they will be
Mm.
frightened to death. They will recall what happened. They will be afraid that the worst is going to happen to them. And as this goes on without some sort of adequate intervention, people will manifest medical conditions. So, you might wonder, well, why? What's the point? What's the point in us caring about this? Well, we should care about it because an event that happens right here, right now, can linger for years and will wear on every single social system that we have. Our medical system is going to have to step up one way or another. People's um, primary care physicians will have to step up. Their therapist and anybody who's in the chain of care is going to have to step up. And when they don't, what you see happening is people ultimately ending up in the hospital for
Mm.
long-term care, assisted living. And sometimes people don't survive these experiences because there's physiology, there's pure science behind trauma. For instance, the way that the neurosequential model that Dr. Bruce Perry has designed for us to understand the effects of trauma begins with, and I'm putting my fist up here, my arm and my fist. So if you think of this part as the brain stem, the midbrain, the limbic system, and then on top, the cortex, which is where we do our higher level thinking of past, present, future, where I can think about time, I can strategize, I can do all this major planning in my life. And that can be taken away from this, that prefrontal cortex, sophisticated thinking that we do, because when we're experiencing trauma, it's about fight, flight, freeze, and submit. Because remember, I said earlier, it's an overwhelming, overriding, inescapable, possible near death experience. We're trying
Can
to
you
survive.
repeat that cycle again? Fight? Can
Yes,
you?
sure. Fight, I'm going to rumble. Flight, I'm going to bolt. Freeze, you
Can't do
know,
nothing.
can't do, because sometimes you just shut down, you know,
Mhm.
or submit where it is intentional, where you realize that the only way I'm going to survive this is to just submit to this situation.
Mm.
And if I live through it, I'll be able to get up and move. But right now, I'm just going to let happen because I realize I don't have the strength or whatever to fight back. So, and these things happen so quickly that it's, we're not, gee, what should I do right now? I mean, it is an immediate response that we are having in order to survive. These responses are things that we do to protect ourselves. They are defense mechanisms, but they are protective factors because what? The organism wants to survive.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yes. And even if you decide to fight, you realize you may not survive it, but that's still a decision where you're trying to protect yourself. And keep in mind that these fight, flight, freeze, submit responses don't always look sophisticated. Sometimes, sometimes they look real raw. And then sometimes they do look a bit more sophisticated because then it becomes part of a person's repertoire of defenses that they use in order to deal with things. Think about it, if you're in a classroom or you're in a employment situation and you feel like you're being bullied, you may not unravel. You might say, oh yeah, sure, whatever, because that's what you've done to adopt dealing with the situation. So it can range for people, but more than anything, Stella and everyone, I'm here to really lean into and promote our humanity, and take nothing less than that from our society. You know, we are folks, we are people, we are souls, we are beings, and we all count. We all count. And in counting, it's holistic for us to think about and demand that all of our needs be met. So yeah, I want to see all of our budgets at federal, state, and local levels deal with everything, including this very humane side of ourselves, which is the care that we need when things happen. When you mention the natural disaster in disasters rather in North Carolina around the hurricanes, you know, those things are going to happen. It's just like the confluence of things I've been hearing about related to the LA wildfires. So if something like a natural disaster is going to happen, then I believe that we have to build into budgets how we recover, repair our way out of these events as well. So
Mhm.
if not, you know, what are we saying? That doesn't matter. That part of our humanity doesn't matter.
So
I
you're
don't think that's
saying we should build into our budgets um, funding to care for the mental stresses of both the victims and the care workers. That should be
absolutely.
built into any any kind of recovery has to talk about our mental health recovery as well as our physical structural component. Um,
Absolutely. Because if we don't, you know, if we don't build that in, then you and I and everybody else who's done human service work have watched people fade away. We
mhm.
Yeah, people who were, you know, contributing to society fade away because on the other hand, there's this notion that you should be able to handle it. Well, that's ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. Like that pandemic that occurred. Just
Mhm.
because we're not in the acute phase of it doesn't mean we're not in the post acute phase of it. There are people who want to live with that forever. Every time somebody coughs around certain people, they're going to get nervous. Because if you lost one or many people, or you just watched the nightly news and heard about how many deaths were occurring on a daily basis, that was that could have been overwhelming for many people. I know it was overwhelming for me. I shed a
Mhm.
lot of tears over
Mhm.
that pandemic. I remember crying during a meeting. I couldn't help myself. The moment I started talking, I said, I've been calling people. And I had to pause to kind of gather myself because the next few words were, and they were not responding. And they weren't responding because they were gone.
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you, Miss Jones. She's saying that secondhand trauma is very interesting. Miss Jones is a school teacher, and she's dealing with the young victims of these traumas. Is there any insight for how teachers and can assist their students in dealing with um, traumas? There are a lot of things that are coming up. Some of the young students that she works with, their parents are frightened about immigration issues. Their children that see the fire and see the fire on TV and are concerned about it. How can educators work with the students that they have to help them through this trauma?
Mhm.
We often don't think about the impact it has on young people.
Yes. So thank you so much for that question. And thanks to the teacher for the amazing work of educating. You know, children are not like adults, their brains have not finished growing. So they don't have the ability to regulate, meaning maintain composure in the face of difficulty the way that adults do. So I have one word that I want to use for children and adults, but we're talking about children right now, and that is grace.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to really let that sink in. Grace. You know, sometimes adults have high expectations of children. They make demands of children. We want children to shift and do things, on a dime. But that's not going to happen, especially when a child's been through hell. So, as the adult who has the capacity to understand that a child has not had the experiences that adults have, don't have the wisdom and the ability to process things the way that adults do, to show children patience and a lot of grace. And I believe that introducing them to this language early helps them. It helps everybody. Think about it. When you develop a vocabulary to help you understand what's happening to you, the first thing you do is realize, oh, so I haven't lost it.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of feel good about that. Like, oh, so this is a normal reaction. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And, of course, if things grow out of hand and something becomes unacceptable, well, all that means is there's a need for a higher level intervention. And I'm not talking about a criminal justice response.
Come on, come on.
It means that there's more need for therapy,
Mm-hmm.
and conversation, education with, adults, educating, first of all, school administrators, faculty, everyone who comes in contact with children. This could start with the school psychologist or somebody else that the school authorizes to come in and provide some education, and maybe even having trauma informed social workers come in and meet with students, teachers, and so forth, to give everybody a vocabulary so that they're speaking a common language and have a common understanding of what has happened. I'm a big fan of using cinema and literature to teach. So, a movie that I recently used, shout out to Ava DuVernay, and one of my favorite authors on the planet, Isabel Wilkerson, the movie Origin, which was written about Isabel Wilkerson's life, and as she was writing the book Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent. And I've used that film to teach people about discrimination and about trauma. So use cinematography, use literature, use what is in the media headlines. Earlier, Stella, when you talked about the LA wildfires, I took time to watch an interview that Matt Gutman, NBC News national chief correspondent, gave to the host of The View. And I couldn't help, because I was moved by Matt's words, because it aligned so much with trauma language. For instance, he said things like, I want to give you a sense of the destruction. The mind can't really comprehend the scale of it.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, I said trauma is this overwhelming, overriding event.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He went on to say things like, everything here was destroyed. He said things like, destruction here is really impossible to comprehend. Again, overriding. And I said, Matt may not realize it. I know his job is to report out what's going on here, but in his own way, he's selecting vocabulary that's helping me and others recognize that you're right. This is so overwhelming, overriding, that it's almost more than you can find words to use to describe what is happening here. So imagine if your brain, where you're choosing vocabulary from, can't find the words. Imagine what your body is feeling.
And at this point, I know you prepared some language and some theory things for us to ponder and put into our own language, to put into our own understanding. And we've got about 15 minutes left, so I want to give you the time to really go through that piece, if you don't mind.
I would be happy to. And I don't know if you can see the PowerPoint. Can you see it?
Yeah, there you see it. Why should human servants practice trauma-informed care is the slide I see.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So this technology is new to me, so thank you for bearing with me. And my response, I wrote that question, and my response is, we should practice trauma-informed care to promote client-centeredness. That's number one. Always, making sure the client is at the center of everything that we do, and ensure employees have the tools for success. How often in human services do we lack the tools?
We lack the tools, we lack the money.
Which is at this phase, it's becoming unacceptable because it's intentional. We can do better. We have to do better. If we're putting human beings first, and I know there are people who want to put things first, but I can't go along with that. I just can't. So and devoting time to advocacy, because we have to, on a regular basis, inform our leadership about why this work is important. Anytime.
Yes.
Why? Because we're competing with folks that go to Capitol Hill and Washington, D.C., or any other Capitol Hill or City Hall, and they're lobbying for something else. And they have a right to, but not over the interests of human beings. And moving on to the next slide, vicarious trauma, which is also known as secondary trauma. Those terms are interchangeable, at least in my lexicon. Compassion fatigue and burnout. Well, we've been talking about secondary trauma, aka vicarious trauma, which is a category of traumatization that occurs when someone hears about or witnesses someone else's traumatic experience. Hence, human service workers being on the front line, oftentimes in person with people, or even if it is remote, but being on the front line with people, watching them convey their emotions, relay stories. We're using our imagination as we're processing what they're saying. And, the thing about watching a movie and listening to someone is that whether it's made up or real, the brain doesn't know the difference.
Okay, come on.
Which is, so for those of us that like scary movies, and I didn't always, but I'm kind of starting to like them now, but you're like, ooh, sitting on edge and everything. And the brain is going through what it would be like to walk down that hallway while it's dark and you're hearing that drop of water. That's, and the brain does not. And the same thing is happening to the human service worker as you're listening to your client or group of people tell you what's going on, or you're witnessing the firefighters put out these wildfires or whatever it is that you are engaged in, and you don't know the difference. So you're having the full experience as well. There must be support for the human service worker going through that, because if you continue to underfund these services, all we're going to do is get to compassion fatigue, which is the second thing on there, which is a type of traumatization that may occur when exposed to someone else's trauma. Is characterized by emotional exhaustion, numbness, psychological overwhelm, deep fatigue. In other words, you become ineffective. Yes, you mean well, but you can't produce the energy that you need to be. It just
becomes a rubber stamp kind of work, and it's not really client-centered anymore. It's just kind of, let's just get through this, fill out the form, and pass it on.
Yes, and we've all experienced.
You lose your compassion for each individual, and you start treating them as a collective.
Oh, I'm so happy that you said that, Stella. If I can add, you not only lose your compassion, but you lose your ability to empathize with them as well. So empathy is how we feel, how we're seeing them. Can we relate? Like, oh, how horrible that must be. And then the compassion is, what do we do? So you lose both things, the ability to feel what you need to conjure up the energy to do what must be done in order to assist. Yes. And then last but not least, burnout, which is basically, the body might be here, but all systems are down in terms of my performance because I am so worn out. This thing is mental, emotional, spiritual, physical. It is everything at this phase.
This reminds me, the burnout phase. I was at a point of burnout many years ago, and I was offered the opportunity to participate in the Z. Smith Reynolds Fellowship sabbatical program. And in the interview, I was so burnt out. The trauma of working with so many families that were losing their homes and not knowing how to, not having the tools to save their homes, right? I was sitting in the interview crying. I later found out that they probably picked all of the five of us because we all found out we all cried in the interview. We were that burnt out.
Wow.
But it was a 3-month sabbatical. And during that time off, when I came back to work, people asked me if I had had a facelift, if I had gone and gotten a facelift. That's how much stress and stuff that I was under, that just being free from that trauma for 3 months rejuvenated me, did what the purpose of that sabbatical was, which was to help us keep those of us who are on the front lines, keep us from burning completely out and giving us the strength and the motivation to continue in the field. So, yeah, I was there. I was there.
Thank you so much for sharing that experience, because it's very descriptive of exactly what happens to people when you're on the front line, when you're extending your emotions, extending your heart, when you're displaying that empathy, that compassion, but you need to restore and rest and rejuvenate so that you can go back. I'm going to bring up Mama Ruby Sales again, because I watched her talk to someone younger who questioned, was the part of the civil rights movement that she participated in successful or not. And Mama Ruby Sales said something that has stuck with me. And that is, you cannot put somebody on the front line in the battle for 5 years straight and not relieve them.
Okay.
You can't do that to somebody. Yet we get into human service work because we care. We have the ability to assist people, but when we don't have the tools, which includes time for rest, repair, and rejuvenation, then you have to stop expecting that they can do that original mission-related work. And it's another reason why all budgets have to build in funding for this self-care, and I'm going to go on to the next slide, because part of self-care is what is described as a safety plan. And a safety plan has two parts to it. There's an internal component and there's an external component. So the internal, meaning inside, what can I do inside myself when I feel threatened, if I feel triggered, things of that nature that I can do to protect and prevent myself from being harmed in this moment. And I just have some examples listed there. Like for me, I'm a nature girl. So if I even sit and I think about the beach, or my walks around the park, I walk around the perimeter of a local park and I'm looking up at the sky and the trees, and I'm noticing the lines in the trees, or I'm looking at the blades of grass or a branch and the leaves on the tree. That helps me to transcend the moment. So if I think about that, I can almost relive that experience, breathing. And I know that's something that we talked about before the show. And for those of you who may not understand, why does everybody promote breathing? Well, number one, it helps us to remain oxygenated. We're carrying oxygen to all parts of our body, including all of our major organs. But another thing about it, when we breathe quickly, we're gearing up for the fight or for the run. That's the fight or flight thing. But when we slow it down and breathe slowly in and then out, and the goal is to breathe out longer than you breathe in. You slow down your parasympathetic system, which does the opposite of the fight or flight. So that's why the breathing is so essential. You're slowing things down. You're also helping with the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve through the body and helps to relax us. Words, I have a mantra, I say my mantra, or I just, tell myself, you must relax, pray, meditate, zone out. If you got to zone out, zone out.
Okay.
Okay. If you to escape, and sometimes you just have to zone out. And then, think, and we are taught in trauma to be aware of the sensations, like where are the sensations in my body? I mentioned earlier, my throat, my neck. When that's happening, I know, okay, homegirl, you're feeling something. And this is not a figment of your imagination. This is really happening to you right now. This is triggering something inside of you that says, danger, Angela, danger. And then, focus on something that feels safe. And then the external plan is just the opposite. What can I do external or physical that will get me out of this situation? And I'm not going to go through that list as exhaustively as I went through the other one, but I will go for a brisk walk in which I might, look up and I'm somewhere like 5, 10, 15 blocks away from where I started, because it's helping me to process what happened and burn off that energy that's inside of me that is no good for my body, my mind, my spirit. So jogging, running, lifting weights, dancing, singing, humming. I tell you, singing and humming can be one of the most rewarding things that we can do to help calm ourselves, because it also helps to soothe that vagus nerve. And so I've been taught things like sit near an exit, because sometimes you might have to just exit the room. Okay. And one way to exit the room is, I need to use the ladies' room. And go in there and literally collect yourself. And, the thing about a safety plan is, don't develop one in the middle of a crisis.
Okay, a plan is preparation. A plan is preparation. You can't come up with it in the middle of a crisis. That is so important.
Yes. Yeah. Think about it long before the crisis and practice it before the crisis, because then you can really be ready. And besides sharing my information, this is the slide I want to share. And I know I'm not the only person who feels this way, but, as a human service servant, because I believe we are servants, it doesn't matter if, but when something or someone will trigger you. We're going to be triggered in this work. And the degree and frequency will depend on your willingness to be consciously aware of yourself. This is self-work. And I have learned it's self-work that's about self-love. And I'm going to really, underline the significance of the self-love, because the more we love ourselves, the more we believe and stand firm in our belief, and then demand action from people that we are also cared for. So we can do all the self-care on our own, but it can't only be ours. It has to be inside out, outside in. And that's, to me, the way that human services has to operate: inside out, what I can do for me, but it's also outside in.
And I appreciate you so much. This has just been really insightful and really helpful. And
thank you.
If you have any questions, her information is there. But you can, leave questions in the comment section and we'll get to you and answer them for you over time. Again, the key things we need to take away is: 1, you can't care for others if you don't care for yourself. 2, your trauma is real. It's not your imagination. And then take care of yourself and take care of others. And we appreciate all of the human service workers, volunteers, municipal staff, nonprofit staff. We encourage all the government and non-governmental entities to build in budgets that allow for sabbaticals, budgets that allow for counseling, budgets that allow for getting the resources that people need to feel safe and to be able to continue their work. And again, thank you so much, Angela. Right now, folks, I'm going to turn and talk about something that's been on my heart and mind. One of my mentors, Dr. E. Lavonia Allison, has passed. And she was 94 years old. But those of you in North Carolina, those of you in Durham, know her as the warrior queen that she was for civil rights, for voting rights, Black political power. She was the epitome of that. She taught me all the strategies and tactics that I use against the enemy. I learned them at her knee. Sometimes she need me, and sometimes I learned the lessons without the beating. But she taught generations of African American, specifically African American women, that we had and needed to exercise our political power, that it was a must, that we had to stand up. And the thing I loved about Dr. A is that she stood up, never back down, never back down. And she didn't care who you were. You could be a king, a queen. You were no more imperial than she was. And she believed that elected officials served the people. The people didn't serve them. And so she spoke to elected officials as if they were her employees and they needed to do as she instructed. I love her with all my heart, and I'm going to miss her so much. I'm not even sure. I can't even imagine what this next season is going to be without her leadership and her mentorship. But she always passed on her wisdom. She didn't keep her knowledge and wisdom to herself. She was always saying, we need young people involved. Where are the young people? She felt we were a little weak because we weren't standing, we weren't taking over. She didn't believe in passing the torch. She believed in teaching you to take it, that you were supposed to take power, that if you weren't strong enough to take it from her, it wasn't yours. She advocated for education, for educating our Black students, for making sure for academic excellence. She was an educator, but she was also engaged in, and people forget this, but a lot of the rural health clinics and the urban health clinics, they all were part of her work when she was at UNC running the minority health program. The fact that there are dentists and doctors in rural North Carolina, there are Black dentists and doctors all over the state and the nation, is because of her advocacy within her work. She was always building and doing, and I don't want her legacy of healthcare to be lost because she did so much in the realm of education and politics. But she also was a great contributor to access to healthcare for rural communities and minority communities across the country. She left us so many great speeches, and I'm going to ask Mark to pull up a speech she gave to the children at the School of Math and Science, and her call to these young students to take on leadership. And that's how we're going to close our show today. Listening to her words and her majesty. I cannot tell you how much she means to me, how much she meant to this nation, and how much her work has improved our lives. And she took the arrows for us. She was our sword and our shield. And I appreciate and love her, and I miss her greatly. Mark?
Good afternoon, everybody. This is really a sort of a humbling experience. I sort of regret that that 1 page and a half was shared with the young lady to say some things. But before I start, let me just say that nothing is possible unless you have a lot of people helping you. I want K. Michelle Allison and her husband to stand. F. Vincent Allison III to stand. And if F. B. Pete Allison is looking over us, let's give him a hand also. Because anything that is achievable can only be done when there are a lot of people helping you. Joanne Barber, stand up. And the reason I'm asking her to stand is when I became a member of this board of trustees, and I'm not going to take much time, but sometimes you really have to take some time to tell the truth. I used to give Joanne a little bit of problem. Because, one of the things that you got to do, and she's an excellent, beautiful person working hard, but sometimes in the context in which you're located, there's some things that you keep quiet on, even though you want to speak out on. So I want to thank her for everything she did those umpteen years she was here, struggling to make this school what it's going to be. This is the most excellent opportunity that all you kids have. You got to take it and make something different. And I'm not going to be a speech writer or a speech giver, but I want you to wake up. That's the message that Martin Luther is calling us to do. They wake up. Can you spell wake? Can you spell UP? What does it mean when you say wake up? I'm not going to answer that for you, but I want each one of you to take those 2 words and make a difference in terms of what kinds of opportunities you have every day. And let's give this group a hand. Tremendous. And the people say, well, you're too passionate. You have to be passionate. You have to share some inspiration. And you see, I always go through my speech file. I'm not going to use it, but there are a couple of things I just want to leave from this speech file. I looked at all of these quotations that Martin Luther King had mentioned. And somewhere it says something, I will not remember what the enemies have done for me. or against me, but I will remember the silence of my friends. Joanne, we appreciate what you did. You need to come on back. And finally, let me just say a word called together. Together is a beautiful word. Coming together is the beginning. Keeping together is progress. Thinking together can be unity. But working together is success. I shouldn't say this, but you know what? Voting together can be victory. And finally, I just want to mention some words of what Robert F. Kennedy said in 1966 in South Africa. Let no one be discouraged by the belief there is nothing one man or one woman, one student or one other student can do against the enormous array of the world's ills, against misery and ignorance, injustice and violence. Few will have the greatness to be in history itself, but each of us can work to change a small portion of events, and in the total of all those acts will be written the history of your generation. It is from numberless diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped each time a man or a woman stands up for an ideal or strikes out against injustice or acts to improve the lot of others. He sends a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Thank you, North Carolina School of Science and Math, for this humbling honor. It's time for all of us to wake up and make a difference in this world, because democracy is at the center of everything that can make this world better. Thank you so very, very much.